You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
And welcome to the Win-Win podcast. This is your host, Ben Wolf. As usual, we're going to learn from our guest today why the office is over and what that means for your business. Please subscribe, leave a review, like, follow, etc. Pause, do that. It supports and gets this content out to more people. Moving on to the content today, I'm excited to welcome our guest, who is the CEO of Meetup, which is the largest platform for finding and building local community, whose goal is to use technology to get people off technology. He's the author of Decide and Conquer, 44 Decisions That Will Make or Break All Leaders. Link to that on Amazon in the social media and in the show description. Our guest was previously CEO of Investopedia, and before that, the president at Seeking Alpha. He's the host of the Keep Connected podcast. You can find out more about what he's up to these days at meetup.com. And I give you David Siegel. Welcome, David.
Good to be here. I will leave a review just like you asked.
Thank you.
Have my word.
I do appreciate it. I am
I'll
grateful
be biased
for that.
because I'm a guest, but that's okay.
Right. Well, that's not cheating. First thing I want to do is get into, okay, we're talking about the office is over. You've got an interesting background, doing a lot of cool things, but give us a quick 2-minute background. How do we get to be talking about office is over? Give us some context in your background for where we get to be talking about that today.
Okay, I love it. I just got an interesting, which means that's like a nice way of saying you were all over the place, David, in your background. So speaking, I started off in consulting because when you have no idea what you want to do in life, you start off and just start consulting to others because you don't know anything. So why not tell people what to do? It's perfect. And then I was an early
indictment for consulting. Okay.
Isn't it? Then I never went back for a reason. Then I was an early employee at DoubleClick, which was really the world's largest internet advertising company, and ultimately got sold to Google for $3 billion. Oh. And that just got me in the digital world, super early in my career. 1998, actually started consulting them in 1999, starting there. And I think the biggest influence on kind of my philosophy around community, my philosophy around people, is because I started my career in consulting and also DoubleClick in human resources. And there are not that many CEOs that start off in human resources. You start off in product, you start off in sales and marketing.
Right.
Very few are HR become CEO type things. But in HR, what are you focused on? You're focused on how do you manage great people? How do you recruit great talent? How do you set up organizational structures for success? How do you align strategy, and people operations? And I did all those things. And I remember the CEO of DoubleClick, a guy named Kevin Ryan, said, "Hey, David, I spend all my time on human resources. And so do you." And I thought to myself, maybe I could be a CEO one day. And then, after going to business school at Wharton, the rest of my career was really a progression through 1-800-Flowers and Everyday Health and a bunch of other big digital properties. Then became a president of a company, like you mentioned. I became CEO of Investopedia and then finally CEO of Meetup. And it was really all the path towards becoming a CEO, because the thing that always resonated the most for me was building culture. And when you build a great culture, you enable people that are within the organization to thrive. And I think it goes back to my past around that. And I've always been kind of a people-centered leader. And, I think that, helped me to set me up for, running the largest community platform in the world with 59 million members, with 257,000 communities that we have on a platform in 193 countries, every country but North Korea. I'm speaking in Ireland, and I'm going to in a conference, and I'm going to be speaking at 5 different meetup groups that are just, there because there's just meetup groups everywhere. And it's
right.
It's really rewarding.
Wow. Okay. I mean, obviously there's a lot to go in, and we don't have time to go into all the stuff that I'm interested in hearing more about. But, what caught my attention was this thing that you say, the office is over, in deep foreboding tones. And so what makes you say that, and what does that mean?
Okay. So there's a reason why the Great Resignation is happening right now. with 4.5 million people resigning every month on a consistent basis. And the reason for that is the loss of community at work. People used to be at work and they would spend time at work and they would build community among people and they build relation among people. And there was friendships being built, especially among younger people that don't necessarily have the communal infrastructures, the churches, the synagogues, et cetera, to be able to go to, because many fewer people go to those institutional infrastructure anymore, communal institutions. So the result of that is that people are working from their homes. And once people have gotten a taste from working from their homes, after a few months, they could have gone back to the office. But after 2+ years, the number of companies has hit a tipping point, especially in tech, maybe different in some other industries, but especially in the tech industry. There's too many different options for people now, like the Airbnbs, which we may get to at some point, who have said, we're not going to make you go back to an office. The Salesforces of the world, many other companies of the world that have said, we're not going to make you go back to the office. And other companies have said, you'll go back to the office 1, 2, or 3 times. So the office is not dead. The traditional way in which everyone had gone to the office 5 days a week, especially in tech, is over. Because if you want to compete for talent, you're not going to get the best people if you insist on people coming in 5 days a week. And it's going to be an enormous sacrifice.
Right. Right. Well, talk more about for a second, like, what did Salesforce do? What did Airbnb do? How is that affecting everybody else?
So what Airbnb said is people could work remotely, essentially, for as long as they want to. They could work wherever they need to work. And Salesforce has not gone that far, but has generally said that there's a flexibility amount when you work, where you work. Other companies like Google or Facebook are looking at, I think, 2 days a week or 3 days a week in the office. And there's some more extreme banks, for example, like Chase, that I think is still mandating 4 or 5 days a week, in the office. So it's a spectrum. But I have friends that are senior people at Chase, for example, and they said that they're losing people left and right. Lots of people are quitting because they don't want to necessarily go to the office 4 or 5 days a week. And right. I would even question whether you truly have to. You have to have community. And I think it's very important to have an office. So at Meetup, we're going to be moving into an office, and there's ways of building community outside of an office. But I think the traditional step of being in an office 5 days a week to force people is gone, because there's too many other solutions, and when you're competing for talent, that are not forcing people to do so.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not that heavily focused in the work that I do on the tech space, but I'm definitely seeing that, the effect that that's having of those that are able to work remote, even in other industries, maybe not super physical industries, but a lot of other industries, even outside of technology, services, professional services, all kinds of things, that people also have a lot of options. And they could, some are hybrid, some are fully remote, so there's going to be a certain portion of the talent pool, which is already in short supply, that can, if they prefer to, work in one of these other types of places.
And Ben, what I would add is, if you look at kind of the history of the last 30 or 40 years, many of the business and human resource processes that exist started in tech and they filtered to other places. So what's an example of that? So in the 60s and 70s, only tech companies were really giving options to employees. There wasn't like a big option pool available to people. And then it started to progress and extend to many other companies, such that nearly every company and type of industry now gives options to employees. And there's many examples where different perks that people in tech started to get, whether it was more extensive maternity times to be able to leave, or having a larger paternity type leave.
Right.
All those things start in tech, and they extend from tech into banking, into retail, into manufacturing, into other industries as well. So much like tech has kind of really been more of the leader in kind of not necessarily working from the office, it's going to continue to extend as well.
Right. Do you have observations, we spoke about, let's say there's some things where you need, where collaboration is just impractical digitally, or people have more of a physical involvement in whatever work they're doing. Um, there's a mix, right? Some people in those businesses need to physically be together. They need to be together sometimes, but maybe not all the time. Or there could be some people in the business that need to be together, but other people in the very same business that should be part of the same culture that don't need, because of the nature of their particular role, to be physically together. Do you have anything you're observing of how people can more effectively navigate that, where there's like either where they need to be fully in person for some reason, for some practical reason, like it's not like a choice, and or whether even in those places, not every person in that business needs to physically be there or has that sort of work. Are you seeing anything about how people navigate those things, or how they could do so better?
Yeah, it's super complicated because you do have some roles where people will benefit greatly by being together in person. So an example of that, an extreme, is obviously manufacturing, but even taking away manufacturing, design, where there's collaborative design work that happens amongst people, and there's a benefit to actually iterating back and forth with people. And then there's other roles where you could really be a lone person. You work in accounts payable or accounts receivable.
Right.
You could just do that from your house, and it's really not an issue at all. You work in potentially customer service. You again do that from your house, and it's not much of an issue. Companies are struggling with this. We're struggling with this. Most companies are extremely sensitive to any kind of perception of inequity. It's very important that companies treat every person the same and similarly. So what most companies are doing is they can't say something to the effect of, well, if you're in this function, you don't have to come in. If you're in that function, you do have to come in. That's a big problem. And no one wants to feel like they're being punished, whatever it is, by being in a certain function or rewarded because they're another function. So nearly every company I know is therefore just setting a set policy. The policy could be voluntary for anything. It could be mandatory 2 days a week. It could be mandatory 3 days a week out of 5 days.
Right, but it's across the board.
It's all across the board. Is that the ideal? No, because of the different jobs, but it's the reality for a very good reason, that there's don't want to be any perceptions of kind of of improprieties.
Right. All right. And let's say for those organizations that have some reason why they need to be in person, either partially or fully, it's their choice or it's not their choice. I know you've spoken before about like free swag versus like community versus meaning, different things. What are the most effective ways that you've seen for people who do need to be back in the office to some extent or other, or back in person to some extent or other? Like, how can they do that more successfully?
Okay, I'm going to give you two things. And it's like, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of them's all the way in the bottom of the hierarchy of needs, and one of them's at the tip top. So the bottom of the hierarchy of needs is like food. People love free food. I love free food. And junior people love free food. So when we are going to have people coming back to the office, which is very shortly, full-time at 2 days a week is our plan, by the way. We're going to mandate 2 days a week, and we've already told people that. We're going to have breakfast for everyone. We're going to have breakfast.
Like hot breakfast.
Hot breakfast. Wow. Waffles, pancakes, eggs. People are going to be excited to get into the office. And oh, by the way, the breakfast start being served at 8:30, like to 9:30. Someone comes, rolls in at 9:45. No waffles and pancakes for you. Sorry.
Right. Nice.
And then free lunch is also for people.
Wow.
So when you do that, it's a small cost, but it'll get people start getting to the habit. The number one best-selling business book over the last numerous years is Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
If everyone has read that, or The Power of Habit, you need to start getting people into habits. Tony Robbins said, you want to start working out? Well, the best thing to do is drive to the gym, get an ice cream, whatever is at the gym, get a smoothie, and then leave. Don't even start working. Then go to the gym the next day and walk in. Just start building the habits. So what happens is you start building the habits of people 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in, then people will start being much more comfortable kind of coming to the office. And food is one. That's the bottom of the pyramid, but it works. It works.
Okay.
Now the top of the pyramid is community. So you have to find ways in which people will be able to kind of spend extra time bonding with each other. If you're in an office and everyone is back in the office and they're staring at their laptops on Zoom the entire time, fail. Like,
right. What's the point?
That would just frustrate so many people. This, again, people I know at companies who say, I come into the office and I just sit in front of Zoom the entire day. What's the point? And there is no point, and it just angers and frustrates lots of people.
Okay.
So you need to find ways in which people interact. Now, some people might be on teams that are more hybrid and more remote. So they're going to be on Zoom calls, and that's fine. But how could you have activities, certainly in the beginning, to get people together? So one of the things that we're doing, for example, as an activity is there's a woman who's amazing at meditation. So she's been running meditation classes once a week. Great. And people could bond and spend time together doing that. There's another person who has like an expertise in a certain area. He's an expert at credit card loyalty programs, for example. So every person, different people are going to give like a little session on something that they happen to be an expert in. What it does is it builds community. Eating together builds community amongst people. It's a different relationship that you have when you're actually eating together than when you're sitting in an office. So
Right.
you've got to find ways in which community can be built, relationships can be built, and people feel great. And oh, by the way, if you don't go 5 days a week, chances are, like most companies, very few, almost no one's going to be there on a Friday. Very few people will be there on Mondays. It's going to be concentrated in Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday is when most of the people will be coming back into the office. And what's good about that is because then there's an energy. If it's distributed among, all the different days, there might be less of energy. You want there to be that energy when people are there.
Right. Well, and that gets into something else, which is part of what you said kind of got completely undone, right? You talked about community before and connection, and how, maybe when everything was full time, people that were perhaps younger or people that don't have some community outside of work, exactly, a few friends individually, but not really a sense of community, and that they would get that through the office. So if that's mostly over, obviously, for those that are in person or to one extent or another, you could have some of that. But I suspect this connects with the mission of Meetup probably. But like, where does community come into this, or what are some other ways people can find community?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing that I always tell people is to find something that you are passionate about. It could be playing soccer, in which case there's community platforms out there, Meetup being one of them, but the other platforms as well, just not as good, just kidding. But to find people that love playing soccer, there could be people that love hiking, there could be people that love learning about tech. Find something you're passionate about and go out there and be vulnerable, be comfortable going out there. Maybe if you don't know anyone, because that's people's biggest challenges, getting off the couch, shutting Netflix off, and just going out and doing something. And it's hard to do that, especially if you don't know someone else. If you need to bring someone with you as a security blanket, bring someone with you if it'll get you to go out there. But if not, try to find people that you want to build relationships with, because the reality is the loneliness epidemic that exists in this world is terrifying. Right. 46% of people regularly feel lonely, which is very scary statistic. And among Gen Zers, it's up to 62%. So people are thirsting for community. Work was the place where everyone got it. And now they need to find other places close to their home or around their passions for them to find real community. And you know what? If your entire community is solely online and digital, it's just not the same as an IRL and real life community. Right. You can have both in person and online, but if it's only online, it's a far different experience than the real experience of doing things together in person.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I guess finally what I wanted to get to, if you don't mind, is I know you do have this new book, Decide and Conquer. Like, what is that? Like, why did you write it? And, how does it connect with, with the stuff we're talking about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Decide and Conquer is a book that is all about helping people make better business and life decisions. At the end of the day, we're a function of the decisions that we make. And a lot of people have these terrible decision-making biases. They have what's called recency bias. They have status quo bias. They have sunk cost bias. They have all these different biases, confirmation bias. And it's about kind of recognizing different biases that someone may have and how you can make ultimately a better decision about it. I didn't want to write a boring kind of book about decision-making. And then what happened is Meetup, our company, was acquired by WeWork, the famous company that imploded from 47 billion valuation to like the 3 or 4 billion value that it has today. Still not bad, but far cry from the 47 billion. And being owned by Adam Neumann and WeWork and the culture clashes that existed, and then having to run meetup during the pandemic when you couldn't meet up in person, but
Right.
then us pivoting our business model to have over 3 million online events during the pandemic, and 30 million, people attending those events, made for such a crazy story about having to make this decision, that decision. And I just realized that there's a lot of interest in how to make smarter and better decisions. So, that's what Decide and Conquer is all about, kind of a roller coaster ride that helps to teach leadership and decision-making lessons.
Right. And let's say post pandemic is where's Meetup at, I guess, in terms of the proportion of people using the platform for in-person meetups versus virtual. What's that like now?
Yeah. So prior to the pandemic, we were literally 100% in person. We would reject any types of organizers that said, we want to be virtual only. If someone had like an occasional Zoom thing, that we were fine with it, but we're about using technology, like we said, to get people off of technology.
Right.
And then the pandemic hit, and we said, we got to pivot our business model like immediately, or we're not going to exist anymore. We got all of our engineers together, changed our technology, updated everything in a crazy frenzy of a few days.
Although ostensibly going against your mission.
So great question. I love that question. Okay, love it. So there was a lot of debate and disagreement and ultimately a decision around that, which I talk about in the book, which is the question is our mission IRL, or is our mission about building real connections for people?
Right.
And if I look at the words of mission, it's empower personal growth through real human connections, not IRL. Now, the way tactic that we did it was IRL, because we believe the best connections happen through IRL. But that was a tactic, not a mission. So once we talked about this, there were a lot of people that had been around for a while and said, we can't do virtual. I said, okay, then we won't exist potentially. And we thought it'd be a month or 2 months, not 2.5 going on, who knows how many years. Thank God we made that pivot. So it went against our tactic and our strategy to achieve our mission, but never went against our mission. So today, to answer your question, we're like 79.5%, almost 80% back to in person.
Okay.
And we're 20% virtual. And it's fascinating to see some of the heat maps, because like in Florida and Texas, we're like 98% in person, because COVID never happened there. We were, the throes of the pandemic, we were like 80% in person in certain states in the United States that are, tend to be more red leaning states. And it's very interesting seeing kind of the red versus the blue states and the percentage in person versus non in person. And then, there's countries like Brazil and others that are still, having lots of challenges with COVID that are still higher percentage online. So it really depends on the place, but overall we're around 80-20 now, and online isn't going to go away, because there's actually a lot of interesting benefits to online that we never would have unlocked. Like if it wasn't. So for example, let's say you're a parent of children with ADHD, and we have about 100 different parents of ADHD kids throughout the world, but you live in Kansas City, and you went to, and there's no meetup group for parents of ADHD kids. You would not be able to go to a meetup group for that.
Right.
Now, you could get access to any of our 10,000 daily global events or events happening, because you can now experience them anywhere. And so what I say is online virtual meetups are better than no meetup.
Right.
They're just not as good as, in my mind, in-person events.
Do you have some sort of test that you make people say, okay, only if you, because like going back to how you did it before COVID, only if like you can't, like there is no meetup, or there's not enough people in your community that you could organize an in-person meetup, then we allow you to do virtual? Or do you just kind of leave it up to them?
We leave it up to like the invisible hand, shall we say, to let people figure it out. So if someone organizes virtual only and no one's showing up, we will send messages and say like, hey, you may want to try going back to in-person, because lots of people are going back to in-person. And if someone's doing in-person in some very small area with a tiny population, we might say, you may want to open yourself up to online. So we're educating, our goal is to educate our organizers to make smarter and better decisions around where to invest and how to go about building the most effective meetup groups. It's not for us to like allow or disallow one thing or another.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah, very interesting. I appreciate this, and the office being over, or as some would say, the rumors of my death are highly exaggerated. Maybe it's not completely over, but
it's changed forever. It's
right.
changed
Yeah.
forever.
Change forever. Super interesting with, how, decide and conquer and decision making obviously goes into these crazy things, these crazy changes that happen and crises that we face in terms of decision making, decide and conquer. I've seen in terms of what you're doing with Meetup. Super, super interesting. Really, really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Ben. Wonderful conversation. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And we'll see everybody else on the other side. Thanks.
You're listening to Win Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.